The year 1969 gave us Woodstock, the moon landing, and music that shaped generations. Today, we're diving into 5 songs that defined an era when rock was raw and rebellion was in the air. Let's listen in on the songs and their stories. Led Zeppelin burst onto the music scene in 1968, formed from the ashes of the Yardbirds when Jimmy Page assembled what many consider the most talented rock lineup in history. Their second album, released in October of 1969, opened with Whole Lotta Love, a track that would forever change hard rock. What many listeners don't know is that parts of the song were lifted from Willie Dixon's You Need Love.
Woman, you need love. Woman, you need love.
Leading to a lawsuit that was settled out of court in 1985. The band's willingness to borrow from blues artists without credit is a controversial aspect of their legacy that gets overlooked by many devoted fans. Today, the surviving members of Led Zeppelin maintain an uneasy relationship. Robert Plant has consistently refused lucrative reunion offers, preferring to pursue his own artistic vision through collaborations with Alison Krauss and other projects. Jimmy Page has become the keeper of the Zeppelin flame, overseeing remasters and archival releases, while John Paul Jones has worked on everything from film scores to forming Them Crooked Vultures with Dave Grohl. The shadow of drummer John Bonham's death in 1980 still looms large over the band, effectively ending what might have been decades more of groundbreaking music. The famous theremin-like effect in the middle section of Whole Lotta Love isn't actually a theremin at all. Page created the otherworldly sounds by moving a microphone around the studio while Robert Plant's vocals played through a Leslie speaker, then adding tape echo. This psychedelic breakdown became one of rock's most recognizable moments and showcased the band's willingness to experiment beyond traditional blues rock structures. The Jackson 5 signed to Motown Records in 1968, with Berry Gordy taking a personal interest in the group of brothers from Gary, Indiana. Michael Jackson was just 11 years old when I Want You Back was released in October of 1969, becoming the group's first #1 hit. The song wasn't even originally intended for them. It was written for Gladys Knight and the Pips before Gordy decided it would be perfect for his new young act. Behind the scenes, the story was darker than the bright pop suggested. Joe Jackson's brutal rehearsal regimen and psychological pressure on his sons had become infamous, with Michael later revealing that his father's abuse caused him lasting psychological damage. The production team, known as the Corporation, created I Want You Back with its instantly recognizable keyboard intro and complex chord progressions that belied its pop accessibility. After the Jackson 5 era, the brothers, minus Jermaine, formed the Jacksons, but Michael's solo career eventually eclipsed everything else. Following Michael's tragic death in 2009, his brothers have continued performing, trading on nostalgia, while legal battles over Michael's estate have revealed the ongoing family dysfunction that began during those early Motown days. I Want You Back contains one of the most sophisticated chord progressions in pop music history, using descending chords that create a sense of urgency and joy simultaneously. Music theorists have studied it as a perfect example of how complex musical structures can be made accessible to mainstream audiences. The bass line alone has been sampled in over 150 recorded songs, making it one of the most influential musical phrases in modern history. Now, I want to hear from you. What memories did these songs bring back? Drop a comment below with your story from 1969. And while you're at it, hit that like button and subscribe to keep these musical journeys coming. Share this with a friend who still has their original vinyl collection. They'll thank you for the trip down memory lane. The Rolling Stones were already rock royalty by 1969, having spent the previous 7 years building their reputation as the dangerous alternative to the Beatles. Honky Tonk Women was released in July of 1969, just days before their free concert at Hyde Park, which became a memorial to founding member Brian Jones, who had drowned less than 3 weeks earlier. The band had fired Jones shortly before his death due to his increasing drug use and unreliability, replacing him with Mick Taylor. This personnel change marked a significant shift in the Stones' sound, moving them further from their blues origins and into their most critically acclaimed period. The timing of Jones's death and their Hyde Park performance created a dark cloud that has followed the band ever since. Keith Richards and Mick Jagger wrote Honky Tonk Women while on vacation in Brazil. Inspired by the country women they encountered at a ranch. The original version had a country feel before producer Jimmy Miller helped transform it into the urban, horn-driven rocker we know today. The Stones continued touring into their late 70s and early 80s, despite the death of drummer Charlie Watts in 2021. Their longevity is remarkable, though critics argue that their creative peak ended decades ago, with tours now functioning as nostalgic victory laps rather than artistic statements. The tensions between Richards and Jagger have become legendary, with their relationship described as the most volatile brotherhood in rock. The cowbell that opens Honky Tonk Women was played by producer Jimmy Miller, who stepped in when the band couldn't get the rhythm right. This simple percussion introduction became one of rock's most recognizable openings. Additionally, the session pianist on the track was Nicky Hopkins, not regular band member Ian Stewart, as Stewart refused to play songs in minor keys due to his strict adherence to traditional blues structures. Creedence Clearwater Revival released 3 hit albums in 1969 alone, an unthinkable pace by today's standards. Bad Moon Rising, from their second album that year, became one of their signature songs, despite its dire warning of apocalypse packaged in an upbeat arrangement. The band had an unusual story. They weren't from the Bayou as their sound suggested, but from El Cerrito, California. They'd been performing together since junior high school, originally as the Blue Velvets and then as the Gollywogs, before finding their identity as CCR. Frontman John Fogerty's control over the band created deep resentments, especially with his brother Tom, who left the group in 1971. The other members had signed a contract giving John full artistic control, a decision they would bitterly regret. After the band's breakup in 1972, one of rock's most contentious legal battles ensued. Fantasy Records owner Saul Zaentz pursued John Fogerty for what he considered copyright infringement against Fogerty's own earlier works, effectively suing him for sounding too much like himself. The bitter legal entanglements and personal animosities prevented any meaningful reunion, with John refusing to perform with surviving former bandmates at their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. While Doug Clifford and Stu Cook eventually formed Creedence Clearwater Revisited to play the old hits, John has continued as a solo artist, only recently making peace with performing his CCR catalog without the lingering bitterness that characterized decades of his career. Bad Moon Rising contains what is possibly the most misheard lyric in rock history. The line, "There's a bad moon on the rise," is frequently heard as "there's a bathroom on the right." Fogerty himself has acknowledged this by occasionally singing the misheard lyric in concert as a joke. The song has shown remarkable staying power, appearing in over 20 films and becoming a staple of apocalyptic soundtracks. Fogerty has said he was inspired to write it after watching a scene in the film The Devil and Daniel Webster involving a hurricane, which explains the song's references to earthquakes, lightning, and hurricanes, despite its cheerful musical backing. The Beatles were in the final months of their existence as a band when they recorded Come Together for their Abbey Road album in the summer of 1969. What many listeners don't realize is that the song began as a campaign anthem for LSD advocate Timothy Leary's gubernatorial run against Ronald Reagan. John Lennon transformed it into something more abstract, though he was later sued for musical plagiarism by the publisher of Chuck Berry's You Can't Catch Me due to similarities in the lyrics and melody. By this point, the Beatles were barely functioning as a group. Lennon had privately quit, though it wasn't announced publicly until the following year. The band members were pulling in different creative directions, with Lennon's heroin use and the involvement with Yoko Ono further straining already tense relationships. Producer George Martin's orchestration and innovative recording techniques helped hold the fragmenting band together long enough to create their final masterpiece in Abbey Road. Following the band's breakup, each member pursued solo careers with varying success. Lennon's life was cut short by his murder in 1980, while George Harrison died of cancer in 2001. Paul McCartney has maintained the most commercially successful solo career, continuing to tour and record into his 80s. Ringo Starr has toured with his all-star band since 1989. The two surviving Beatles have occasionally collaborated and maintained a friendly relationship, despite the business complications of Apple Corps and the Beatles catalog, which saw ownership pass from Michael Jackson to Sony ATV. Come Together was banned by the BBC for its line, "Shoot Me," which was considered a drug reference, and the sexually suggestive "He Got Walrus Gumboot." The song's mysterious lyrics have generated countless interpretations, though Lennon later suggested it contained character sketches of the four Beatles. An alternate take of the song features Lennon singing "Shoot Me" much more clearly than in the final version, where the word "shoot" is obscured by the bass note that follows it, a deliberate choice that allowed them to keep the line while making it less obvious to censors. These 5 songs from 1969 didn't just define a year, they shaped how music would sound for decades to come. If you enjoyed this journey back to 1969, hit subscribe for more deep dives into the music that matters. Until next time, keep those records spinning.